Hey printmaking students, I'm going to walk you through 3 printmaking techniques within Monoprints. First one we're going to start off with is plexiglass monoprints, and you're going to grab out a few materials. One is going to be one of the pieces of plexiglass. You're also going to grab out a brayer. You'll grab out a piece of newsprint or newspaper to work on. You can grab out some Q-tips. You can also use out one of the skewers, and then we'll also have a few other materials available as well. And then we'll also have paper for templates, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then we'll have inks set up at the back table. For inking, sometimes what people do is they'll just kind of take the colors right out of the bottle and move them right over to the plexiglass. What you can also do is on your work surface, whether that be another piece of plexiglass or your newsprint, you're going to take either a combination of colors or kind of one singular and then kind of create some values and shades. You're going to mix up those colors either on the plexiglass itself, or you can do that on your newsprint and then bring that over to your plexiglass when you're happy with the combination, or you can do kind of any combination thereof. So here I'm just kind of getting an initial coat on my brayer, and I'm just kind of getting a nice color swatch down on my plexiglass. This is kind of the first technique with plexiglass monoprints, is kind of creating kind of almost these base layers where you're using the brayer to mark down kind of zones of ink or color. And then once you are completely satisfied with how your ink is looking on your plexiglass, you're going to get ready to print. So taking one of your pieces of paper, you're going to get the piece of paper placed down on your plexiglass, and then using your hands, you can either use kind of palm side and then rub that down. I've had students that have also liked using kind of the sides of their hands as well, or using their knuckles and the backs of them to kind of create your print as well. And then once you feel like you've gotten all those surfaces really pressed down and printed, you're going to lift up that paper and see the result of your print. And then for continuing to print, if you're kind of working within the same group of colors, what you can do is you don't really need to worry about cleaning off your either brayer or your plexiglass. If you are switching colors, then you would want to get those kind of cleaned off and rinsed off before you move along. Otherwise, what you're going to do then is you can just kind of keep building up your layers of color and information. And this is going to bring us over into the second technique that I want to show you with plexiglass printing specifically. I'm doing kind of that same effect of kind of creating a color swatch. And then what I'm going to do is, using my skewer and my Q-tips, I'm going to draw out a design where I'm kind of reductively taking away ink and then creating almost a drawing within the ink itself. This can be a really nice effect. One thing that you want to keep in mind is that you want to keep your lines fairly wide. You'll notice that when I print this, some of those finer lines kind of get washed out since my ink is on a little bit heavier. So you might have to play a little bit with kind of the thickness of those lines and the desired effects that they give, since your ink will smush out a little bit. Otherwise, this is a really fun technique and can offer really lots of different techniques as far as getting really specific and concise, as well as being much more spontaneous as well too. And then a little bit about monoprints. Monoprints are typically prints where you are just doing kind of one go, with mono meaning one. Literally just kind of translates over into one print. Sometimes these can be a little bit more within a series or within a certain theme or emphasis, but typically monoprints are kind of a unique part of printmaking, where instead of having a body of work or a edition that looks all fairly similar or identical, all the prints in the edition with monoprints can look fairly different and usually hold quite a bit of variety. And then for this drawing technique with the Q-tips, sometimes you'll notice that the ink does kind of clot up on those Q-tips and it'll kind of almost draw off where you almost end up painting with it. So sometimes you do need to kind of switch sides on those Q-tips until your ink dries, and then you can kind of keep going ahead and utilizing those. Otherwise, same as with my other print, once I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to grab one of my pieces of cardstock and go through that same printing process as I did before. So I'm going to get that all aligned. Using my hands and fingers, I'm going to kind of just go through, make sure that I'm hitting all spots on my plexiglass, really making sure that I'm getting nice kind of consistent, even pressure throughout the whole plate and on the back of my paper. And then once I feel like I've gotten everything, I'm going to get that lifted off, see how it looks, and then see how that layering turned out. And kind of the fun thing with monoprints is, since they all end up looking a little bit different, if you have kind of layering that happens or you have a print that doesn't turn out, what you can do then is just kind of keep going over the top, keep layering and keep building up those pieces of information. Sometimes that's how you end up kind of getting some of the coolest prints, just with really playing around with that buildup of color. So when you have prints that don't quite turn out and aren't how you hope they would be, hang on to them, layer over them, because sometimes they can turn into something that's pretty cool, and not always what you expected or what you wanted initially. And then one little technique that I can show you as well, you'll notice here that I didn't re-ink. I'm just reusing the ink that I had before. This would be considered a ghost print. And then what you can also do with this is the third technique with plexiglass that I want to share with you is templates. These can be anything from being really specific and detailed to just really simplified, looking at kind of very basic shapes and forms. And you're really thinking of just kind of resisting off some of your information and then thinking of where you want some of that information to print off. And then it's going to be that same printing process as before. If your stencil or template is fairly thick, you may have to apply a little bit more pressure. Whereas if it's thinner, you don't have to worry quite as much. But pretty cool one where you can really play around with kind of positive, negative, and thinking of just general shaping. And then I can also use that stencil with that kind of reverse print, and then I can also use the circle that I cut out with that print as well to create kind of that reversed image too. And then I decided to clean off my print. I had a little bit of an oops with my black ink, so I washed off my plate and decided to switch colors, and then switched over to some of that blank ink. So I decided to just apply that right to the plexi, and then I decided to leave some of that orange still on my brayer, just to play around with letting some of that mix together and just to soften up that black a little bit and create a little bit more kind of depth and connection with my prints that I've been doing so far with my plexi. And then same as before, just kind of using your brayer to get kind of a nice coat of ink along your plexiglass. I'm going to kind of go in and play around again with kind of that drawing technique and then with building up the templates. So I'm going to fast forward for a little bit here and just let you kind of look at the process on it. And then one thing I just want to touch on with stencils is oftentimes, especially with thinner paper stencils, they're going to stick to that print because they're kind of double-sided with the ink. So sometimes you have to go back in and get those peeled off, but could create really interesting effects with just kind of building up different layers and different effects, where you get kind of lots of different information showing through with kind of different colors and different line works. And then for cleanup with Plexi, for your stencils, if you want to keep reusing them, get them in the drying rack and on a piece of newsprint, and then you can keep reusing them. If you don't really want to use them, or if you just feel like they're not going to hold up much longer, you can also recycle them and then make new ones. Q-tips, if they are pretty saturated in ink, they can get tossed. If it's pretty just minimal where it's just right on the tips, you can let those dry out and then keep using them. Your newsprint that you worked on, make sure that gets thrown away. And then skewers can get reused. If they got pretty covered in ink, just get them rinsed off and then put in the drying rack, and we'll get them put away next time. And then for the plexiglass brayer and any other surfaces you were working on, make sure that those get fully cleaned off with soap and water. You're really going to get those washed up until all the water runs clear, and then you're not seeing any pigment left on either your plexiglass or your brayer. And then I'm going to have us kind of move to a different technique. We'll come back to another technique using the plexiglass. We're using a little bit different ink and different effects, and we're going to switch over to a printing process called jelly prints. Jelly prints are interesting. You're going to use a synthetic jelly plate. Originally these were made out of a combination of gelatin and glycerin, and are still used by printmakers today. However, now they make a synthetic version where it is almost like a rubber, and then you can utilize that to make your prints. They're a little bit different from plexiglass in the sense that since the surface is a little bit more gelatinous and a little bit more squishy, it creates these really kind of soft layers, and kind of creates these really nice kind of velvety and soft transitions with color. So it can be a fun one just to look at kind of base coats with your printing. Can also be one that's really fun with getting into some effects that are really painterly. So with this kind of first technique, I'm doing that same one as before with just kind of building up a base layer. This time I'm kind of building up my colors right on the jelly plate itself. One thing you'll notice is the ink applies a little bit thinner on the jelly plate than it does on the plexiglass, which is totally fine. The nice thing with the surface is it does really release ink right away. So you don't have to worry about that too much, and usually a little bit of ink goes pretty far with jelly plates. And it's often a little bit more surprising than you would think with how far kind of just little bits of ink goes as you start to really build up your colors and your layers. These are also really nice because you can get kind of these nice kind of gradient effects. Sometimes they're also called rainbow rolls. And because it's such a soft work surface, it can be really beneficial for kind of developing those really smooth transitions. Otherwise, kind of same printing process that you used for plexiglass prints. You're gonna kind of get your paper all centered, and then using kind of hands and fingers, getting that kind of pressed and rubbed through the back of your paper, making sure that you're hitting kind of all areas of your jelly plate. And you'll notice when you print with the jelly plates, they almost kind of squish down a little bit. It shouldn't be a really heavy squish, but you will feel a little bit of kind of give as you push down. Otherwise, it'll pick up kind of color nice. You'll notice that as I go back to my jelly plate, almost all of the original pigment's gone. So that is kind of one disadvantage with the jelly plate, is that you do have to really kind of build up your layers each time, and you won't kind of keep a base coat. So it's a little bit more tricky to do ghost prints with these, but not impossible. And then one other thing with these is we don't really want to use any of the kind of Q-tips or skewers with the jelly plate since they're a little bit more fragile. But what we can do instead is you're going to use paintbrushes. And you can end up creating these really nice kind of painterly effects. You can do everything from kind of drawing out a very realistic image Nice thing about the jelly plates is since they are clear, what you can do is you can actually put a reference photo under your jelly plate and then use that as kind of the base painting. I've seen people use these very painterly. They are much more abstract as far as style, but you can use these much more in terms of kind of getting these nice kind of really soft painterly effects if that is something that interests you. Otherwise they can be fun too, just for getting kind of nice, really impressionistic kind of painterly style, and really playing with just kind of that mixing of color with a brush on the jelly plate itself. Really sky's the limit with as far as kind of using paintbrushes to apply with jelly plates. I've seen so much done with these. It's really cool effects. Otherwise, I'm going to speed this up a little bit since we've kind of walked through the printing process and you can just enjoy some of the video. And then same as with the plexiglass prints, you can also use stencils. Stencils are a fun one with these, since they are so soft as far as print surfaces. Oftentimes it makes it so you don't need to apply quite as much pressure with your printing. Whereas with plexiglass, when you have a stencil over top, usually you're fighting a little bit of, since that's such an immovable surface, there's not a whole lot of give with the template, whereas with the jelly plate, ends up giving kind of this really nice soft kind of just kind of push back when you print, which can be nice for stencils because it helps just kind of pick up some of those smaller details without a whole lot of additional emphasis. And then same thing that I mentioned with the plexiglass prints is oftentimes with those paper templates, they are going to want to stick to the print. So especially with some of those smaller pieces. So just make sure that as you get that printed, you might have to take a moment and just kind of pick off some of those pieces of paper. Sometimes using like one of the skewers can be helpful just to get under those edges, or I've had students in the past that have used like just the very tip of an X-Acto blade to help remove some of that. And then as far as cleanup with jelly prints, it's all pretty similar. Anything that got ink on it needs to get washed off in the sink with warm water and soap. Templates, if you want to keep them and reuse them, you can. Otherwise, if you feel like they have gotten kind of totaled, make sure that those get thrown out. Work surface paper, if it's decent, feel free to keep it and you can use it another day. Otherwise, if it's pretty messy, you can get it tossed as well. Otherwise, inks will get put away. Any kind of stylus, template tools, drawing tools that you use should get put back away. and then should get cleaned up as you wrap up your jelly plates. One thing for our classroom sets with those, we store them between pieces of mylar or transparency just so they don't get dusty. So make sure that those get stuck back on and then when they get put away. Otherwise, that moves us to our last technique, which is going to be looking at watercolor monoprints. The technique that we're going to look at today is pretty abstracted. It's looking at a very kind of free and loose technique with watercolor monoprints. You can get way more specific with these as well too. But you'll grab out one of the watercolor palettes, a couple of brushes, a jar of water can be helpful just when paint gets a little bit sticky, and then one of your pieces of plexiglass. And then same as when you've normally used watercolor in the past, you're going to wet your paint pots. With the monoprints, you can go a little bit drier than you normally would with painting. And then what you'll do is just going to use your brush. You're going to paint that watercolor on to your plexi. And a lot of the technique with this is it's looking at kind of more of an abstracted style, just kind of looking at building up color and different shaping and line works. You can also play around with these a lot with just kind of allowing the paint to mix and kind of flow together as you get it down on your plexiglass. One thing to keep in mind, the more water you have, kind of the more smushed the image is going to get, whereas when it's drier, it's usually going to be a little bit more minimal, or it's going to have kind of almost like a staticky or faded look. Otherwise, this can be a really fun one where you can really play around with kind of blending and looking at different effects that you're seeing with those colors. Alrighty, and then as far as cleanup, it's going to be pretty similar. Plexiglass is going to get cleaned up again in warm water and soap. Watercolor palette should get put away. Any brushes should get rinsed out and put in the drying rack to dry. And then same thing, work surface if it's alright. With watercolor prints, usually they're not too messy, so you can probably reuse them when you do some messier prints. So get that put in your storage. If it's super messy though, make sure that that gets in the recycling. Otherwise, that is going to be kind of the intro to kind of 3 simple kind of areas of monoprints that are all pretty easy, pretty navigable, and you'll be trying out these next couple days. So take a look through, feel free to utilize what you need in here. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks everyone.